All right. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Morbid Symptoms Podcast. I'm your host, Tara Van Dyke, and we have quite a banger of a show for you, if I don't say so myself. We're going to be tackling the Lily Phillips documentary. I slept with 100 men, but I'm calling it Lily Phillips and 100 Men. But we're not going to focus on the salacious details or moralizing, pointing the finger about who's responsible for what happened on that particular day. Not that we're all entitled to our normative assessments, of course, but we want to try to use this as a case or as a prism to get at larger issues in terms of the downsides or the fallout from the sexual revolution that I guess started in earnest in the 60s, but probably really we can mark it to when the birth control pill became widely accessible. And also, but the sexual revolution happened under conditions of capitalism. So we get into the increasing commodification of intimacy and sex and sexuality, and getting at maybe how that's disenchanted things that maybe shouldn't have been so desacralized or brought down to like making sex, like having, going out for a coffee or, giving somebody a pat on the back. And also the alienation that it causes, not only with women, but also with men, which tend to get sidelined and, in my opinion, kind of limited as either, perverts or predators or, sexual, what should we call it, opportunists. And not that that's not there, but the sexual revolution has had differing negative and neutral and positive effects with men and women. Not only the same, but I don't want to get too ahead of myself. I'm going to be joined by two other people. Nick is already on the stage, Nick Dury, who was on the show before. Hey, Nick. Nick, I forgot. I'm going to forget things, but I know that Nick is a Scotlander. He's also a member of the Alba Party, and he ran for Glasgow North, I think, in the last elections. And
Yes.
if you want to say just kind of give a little bit, a bit more about yourself before we get into the meat of the matter.
Well, I'm a long-standing community activist, community organizer, tenant activist, really since I was 19 years old, 41 now, and a lifelong socialist. So I've obviously been observing the change in media because I am a digital native, although I'm quite old for that because I'm from a family of engineers, and including software engineers, and so I always grew up with computers ever since I was 3 years old. So really, the change in that media is kind of part of the story today.
No, for sure. Thank you. There's a lot to go, and I was asking Nick and also Laura Jones, who'll be joining us later, as well as Alexander McKay from the Marx Engels Lenin Institute. I have to make sure I say that in the right order. Who's going to be coming in and giving us Marxist-Leninist interpretation of what to make out of looking at the Lily Phillips issue at the level of capitalism and of society, not just focusing on the individual level and getting beyond the question of accountability or victimhood and that type of conversation that's been well fleshed out, I think, online. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly go over who Lily Phillips what's going on here, Lily Phillips and the 100 Men. For people who aren't familiar with that, because it's a UK story, but I'm not sure how beyond the UK borders it's been covered. And then I'm going to go over one important framework, I think, for interpreting, for understanding how we got here, because this isn't just, this is getting a lot of press, but it's not like this is the only type of, this is a singular event when it comes to OnlyFans and pornography, prostitution. And there's some gray areas about when OnlyFans, how to characterize it. Since there's technically, in most cases, not touching, at least skin to skin. I should say, warning here to this episode might not be suitable for young kids, although we're going to keep it fairly above board, but it is adult content. Anyway, so I'm going to bring in Louise Perry's, I think she wrote a book maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I can't remember, and where she was critical of the sexual revolution. And she focused a lot on the downsides, how it's very much a mixed bag, and how if we look at it from the point of view of women, and also couples and society and whatnot, that that her argument would be that the sexual revolution tends to be only discussed in terms of progress, but she wants to focus in on how on the negative aspects of that, which I think can help us bring in an important dimension to this case of Lily Phillips case, but more for me, for my interpretation and what I want to have our panelists talk about tonight, it's not so much that individual case, because of course we can't be in Lily's mind or the people who participated. We don't know what was going on there. But I think that what's even more telling is the reactions to it that make it kind of a cultural event, or maybe a turning point, perhaps. Okay, so with that being said, let me see if I have, So what precipitated this this episode? So OnlyFans star Lily Phillips. This is from People magazine online, I think from the United States. So OnlyFans star Lily Phillips breaks down in tears after revealing she slept with 100 men in one day. That was what precipitated this is the kind of the case that we're going to be interpreting today, what it means culturally and politically, economically, and also, of course, for the relations between the sexes. So for those of you who may not be familiar, Lily Phillips is I guess we'd call her a content creator who rose to prominence through platforms like OnlyFans, and she's branded herself an advocate for sexual empowerment. So she says that she's all for sexual empowerment, and built a significant following by marketing what she described as authentic and unapologetic embrace of modern sexual liberation. All right. But she's become a lightning rod for controversy when her personal and professional lives have collided in a very public way. So she released this documentary. I don't know when this event happened, but she released this documentary. I think it was December 7th. And so in the Josh Peters documentary, documentary titled "I Slept with 100 Men in One Day," the OnlyFans model recalls sleeping with multiple men in one day in October to create a not suitable for work content for her subscription-based social media page, which I'm guessing maybe she has other platforms besides OnlyFans. In one clip that has gone viral, the model can be seen breaking down into tears as she says she felt somewhat robotic sleeping with that many men and that many people in one day. This is a quote from Lily, according to People magazine. Well, I think this is from the documentary. I think by the 30th, when they're getting on a bit, I've got a routine of how we're going to do this. And sometimes you just disassociate, and that's not like normal sex at all, Phillips said. In my head right now, I can think of all of like maybe 5 or 6 guys, 10 maybe, that I remember, and that's it. But it's just weird, isn't it? If I didn't have the videos, I wouldn't have known I've done 100. And here's the thumbnail from the documentary, I guess, is on YouTube now. So now, following the release of the documentary on December 7th, Phillips is revealing that she has plans to be the first woman to sleep with 1,000 men in one day. So yeah, on November 5th, Phillips shared a TikTok saying that she was currently in training for her 1,000 men goal, which she hopes to achieve by January 2025. And I didn't do not that it matters, but I didn't do the calculation that that's even possible, but for one day, but that's beside the point. She noted that on December 15th, she'll be taking on 300 men, which she said is the most amount of guys I've ever done. It's going to be hard, but in comparison to the 1,000, this should be light work, Phillips said on her TikTok. Okay. So In addition to that, or I don't know the exact timeline, but I guess maybe before this documentary was released, she said that she was having a hard time transitioning. Earlier this year, that it was revealed that despite her vocal support for sex work and casual sex norms, that she'd been privately trying to transition to a more "quote unquote" conventional lifestyle. Reports emerged that Phillips was actively seeking to distance herself from OnlyFans past as she attempted to enter serious relationships and pursue more traditional career path. These revelations were coupled with leaked messages where she allegedly expressed frustration that her past was making it difficult for her to be taken seriously by potential partners and employers. Yeah. And I want to flag that because I think if we have time to talk about it, and we may not, Nick, that I think that there's what people say and what's like socially acceptable to say, and how we react in real life or how we react in real time can be different. So we could say that, of course, your body, your business. If you want to do this, it's fine. People shouldn't be judged. It's, sex work or whatever it is. But when it comes to dating somebody or employers, and they find this out, I think that it's, it's not surprising that this would have a negative effect. So how we react and how our natural reaction, if we can still use the word natural, as compared to kind of like the social consensus, the liberal social consensus, I think is something that also can get women, but not only women, into trouble if they take these cues too seriously, that it's all, just the past is the past. Anyway, unsurprisingly, the internet has had a lot to say about this. Some saw her struggles as a cautionary tale, a sign of the cultural contradictions inherent in how we now approach sex, relationships, and work in the 20th century. I should probably caveat that with, mostly Western countries. This isn't a global phenomenon as far as I'm aware. There's differences. Others accused her of being a hypocrite, arguing that you can't build a platform glorifying a lifestyle and then complain when it doesn't align to social expectations. But again, what I find useful about Lily, this case, is not necessarily her individual story. It's what it reveals about our culture and our political economy. I guess we could call it the cultural political economy. I don't know why I'm laughing. It's not funny, but nervous laughter, Nick. Phillips embodies the promises and pitfalls of the sexual revolution. On the one hand, she represents the idea that women can reclaim their "quote unquote" sexuality without judgment. Kind of, I'm thinking of like the Samantha character in Sex and the City, although she never tried to do something like this. On one hand, she represents the idea, okay, so that you can sexuality, open sexuality, casual, monetize it, and defy outdated norms, or presumably outdated norms. On the other hand, it highlights the persistent gap between those narratives about sexual liberation, so-called, and the lived realities of those who try to embody them. So, this case touches on quite a few deeper issues. So one of the overriding questions that we'll touch upon tonight, and this will probably be more than one episode for me at least, that how much of our culture's celebration of sexual empowerment is rooted in genuine progress, and how much is driven by capitalist accumulation, and also alienation, going back to the sexual revolution and how women and men are relating to each other differently. I know I have a friend, and I don't know if you've heard this, Nick. I don't know how much interaction you have with the younger generation, but both with my son and some of the people I know who are in their 20s, there seems to be a lot of men who really have no direct interaction with women, or seem not to know how to deal with it, and how much of that is just reliance on pornography or OnlyFans or what. It just seems that, yeah. So and how, so I think that's another issue, and how much of that is a direct consequence or just another factor in this is something I can't answer. But I've been hearing about this more and more, and I was thinking about this because, of course, I can understand why people want to say these guys are gross, they were taking advantage of her. No good guy would stand in that line, which could be very much the case. But I also think that what kind of guy who thinks any kind of highly of himself would stand in that line anyway? I mean, I don't know if
Yeah.
you want to that at this point.
Well, I think that's probably true about the failure that we have to associate. And I think it's not just between men and women. I saw a statistic, I can't remember where, but I think it was 40% of American men under 25 don't have a friend.
Hmm. Yeah. And let alone a girlfriend. I mean, I think and it's hard to know because it's anecdotal, but I'm sure there's people doing studies on it. But you hear about the loneliness epidemic and a variety of other things, and I don't know if we have good data on because I think a lot of times when I hear about people waiting longer to get married or not getting married, I usually tend to think about it primarily like economic terms, but it could also be that there's this, alienation or this disconnect that's growing and for lack of a better word, between how, guys and girls would get together. I don't want to say in the olden days, back when we were single, but yeah, I just think that, and this goes against the consensus, but I found it quite interesting. This occurred to me today when I was trying to prepare for this episode, is that it's interesting because you usually hear, and it's true, I understand why when people are talking about sex work, or I'm sorry, prostitution or pornography or whatever, they tend to focus on how it objectifies women. And they're, just kind of makes them this thing for men to use for gratification. And I'm not saying that's not overall the case, but when I notice how these men are being talked about, whether it be like OnlyFans subscribers or the, which is a huger group than the guys who were selected to participate in this, I'll just call it event. I mean, that they're very limited. So either they're like, perverts or predators or, just opportunists who will screw anything that moves. And which is kind of, which to me is like, well, they're denying any kind of subjectivity or any kind of complexity. And I get why that would be people's first reaction, but I think it's really limiting if we want to try to turn this ship around. That we're not going to get very far if we put that kind of binary on the men who are involved in this as consumers or as I guess you call them, a participant, not of this particular thing. That I should say that as far as we know, Lily Phillips and her, because apparently she's made over $2 million from her OnlyFans page, and I think she also comes from a fairly well-to-do family. But that she, and people want to make a lot out of this, that she and her group organized this, planned it, screened the participants, and all of that. So I think that, I don't know if it's with the media or if you have anything to say on that at this point about it becomes difficult to use these old categories, I guess, when trying to get a handle on how to understand the men who are involved in this.
Well, I think in broad terms, people like Lily Phillips have existed before. People who are attempting to capture the limelight through doing some extreme act, some extreme sexual act, or some extreme provocative act. It's just in the olden days, in the legacy media, you had sleazy guys like Max Clifford who would promote you and make sure that you were on the front page of, the Daily Star and the Daily Sport and, and page 3 of the Sun. But that world is dead. That's not an important world. And the pornographers, the people who made money by selling films on VHS tapes, they're gone too. So that whole layer of salaciousness that you could tap into in the kind of post-Mary Whitehouse deregulated world of media, that world is gone. And OnlyFans has, and I did a little bit of research before this podcast, but OnlyFans has 80,000 creators, and it's raking in $1.3 billion a year. So clearly, there are people who can gravitate to the top of that new media environment, but they have to have an angle, and there's no Max Clifford anymore. There's no way in which you can use, the Murdoch press's hatred of the British establishment to catapult your career as the future Melinda Messenger, or from a kind of pornographic environment to I'm a television icon. That world doesn't exist, and so clearly Lily Phillips is trying to tap into that using salaciousness and trying to grab headlines. And you mentioned media sources, old media, which has always functioned in that way, both denigrating but elevating, the provocateur. You're on mute, Tara.
Thank you. Yeah. So I just got a message from Alexander. He's going to be up in just a couple of minutes. So before that, I'm just going to quickly go through, if I can find my notes. Crap. What? Yeah. Perry's example of how this is kind of how we can frame this as kind of the likely outcome of the sexual revolution. Alexander's here, so I'll bring him up. Hi, Alexander.
Hello, Tara, and hello, Nick.
You can unmute yourself, Nick. Oh, he's okay. Oh, Nick, you're mute. Okay, there he is. So Nick, Alexander, Nick.
Good evening, sir.
Yeah.
So I was just about to do a little bit about Louise Perry and how she would characterize this as kind of the likely outcome of like the fall of the sexual revolution. But I want to make good use of your time, so I can push that off, and we can start off with your the Marxist-Leninist interpretation of the Lily Phillips, I guess, cultural event and the reactions to it and how it's being framed.
Well, I can jump straight in on that if you like.
Please.
I mean, it's kind of like the coming together of two particularly horrible strands, really. One is like the commodification of everything down in this particular period of capitalism, right down to what should be the most sort of sacred relations between human beings. I mean, there's an old quote from Marx which says, "All that is sacred is profaned," and you can't get much more of a perfect summary of that being true than this story. And even if you don't regard the actions of the men or anybody involved as criminal, it is a reduction of sex and sexuality and human relations down to the most dull, mechanical level, where all beauty is removed, all actual human feeling is drained out of it, and all that's left is literally a mechanical act of commodity production. The commodity in this case being the porn that was produced, and the act itself again being no more really human than the coming together of two bits of machinery. This is what immediately struck me. And as I said, it brings together two things. One is the commodification of everything right down to the individual level. And then the second part is what I guess you've been talking about already, which is the end point of the so-called sexual revolution under what I'm going to refer to as late stage imperialism, which is decaying monopoly capitalism. And I think that I'll open up just by saying this, that with relation to the sexual revolution, I think that the term revolution is wrong for it, basically, because whilst I think perhaps all of us here would agree that there were certain things that happened in that period that were did represent a certain amount of progress. Like, I don't think anybody really wants to go back to the idea that consenting adults can't engage in their sexual behavior of their choice together. And nobody really wants to go back to, people being prosecuted for expressions of consensual adult sexuality. Nobody wants that. But what came with it is this faux liberation that imagined that being able to be more explicit, being able to be, basically lay a woman over in a bikini over the bonnet of a car, basically use sex to sell everything from cars to clothes to perfumes to washing powder, that wouldn't have a dangerous and damaging impact over time when you combine it with the other developments in, well, specifically British and American and Western European capitalism, which is where all this stuff grew up. I mean, this stuff was born really in Madison Avenue and in the London advertising agencies. This is where it comes from. And when you put that together with the other changes we've had over the last 60 years, which is destruction of community, which is destruction of the bond that the long-standing communities had with previous generations, and commitment to maintaining certain things for future generations. All of that is gone in the atomization that followed in this country, particularly after the 1980s. An atomization which every single Westminster political party bangs on about from time to time. None of them have the faintest idea of what to do about it, because none of them really know what caused it. And if they did, they still wouldn't know what to do about it. And the culture has become infested with this doubly cynical view of human relations, which is some part of which comes from advertising and part of which comes from the porn industry, because the porn industry has had this huge influence over modern culture, because it's where ultimately a lot of like the representations of human sexuality that you see in so-called mainstream productions comes out of the porn industry. It filters through. I mean, one of the centers of the porn industry is, of course, California, right next to Hollywood. They share a lot of personnel, historically speaking, and probably still to this day. So the vision that we grew up with, particularly when I'm thinking of myself, I grew up in the the 90s into the early 2000s. The vision that young men grow up with of sexuality is a very cheapened one. And I can just remember it from being a teenage boy myself. And the view that you were taught to have of women was, well, the more the merrier, lads. Never mind like other elements in like human relationships. Never mind feeling. Never mind like what makes actually the sexual act something that actually has any real purchase in the emotional side of things. Never mind that. It was already in the 90s reduced to this very cheap and alienating and mechanistic presentation of it. So when you add in then the combined effect of like the internet and the further social disintegration in Britain and in the United States, and then you throw in on top of that the way in which the gig economy has sort of merged with prostitution and created like the OnlyFans economy, you have this toxic combination of things. And then on top of that, you have the idea that if you do something extreme now, you can make a lot of money online, particularly online. So if you do some kind of extreme behavior event like Lily Phillips did, you'll get famous, you'll get a lot of money, you'll get a lot of recognition. She'll probably be on, some horrible American talk show before too long or something, explaining how it was so awful for her and she'd never do it again. But please buy my book. And that's the way out that's presented now to younger men and women as a way off the unrewarding track of jobs that don't mean anything, or an education process that doesn't get you into a better social position anymore. And so that's what the generation spawned since the late 90s has been given as a way out. We've gone from the cult of celebrity, which is what perhaps we all as like millennials grew up with, which was sort of personified in the cheap magazines by the tills in supermarkets, to being now it's not. It went from being you could be a film star to being you could be a reality TV star to you could bang 100 guys on camera. Well, that's the downward slope. And so therefore, in an extremely degenerated culture, in extremely degenerated countries like the United States and Britain in particular, that's what you get. So I'm only surprised that this is the first case that I've heard of where this has happened. So I'll leave my initial comments there to invite questions, and any if anybody else wants to come in.
Thank you, Alexander. Nick, do you have something you want to add or respond to that?
Well, I broad general agreement with that, and it echoes kind of what I was saying before. We did historically have an era in which television and media was tightly regulated by the government, and there was an effort to undermine that, and a fight back was led by conservatives. We mentioned Mary Whitehouse before, and obviously the defeat of that effort to regulate media was seen as a progressive development, but it obviously had great consequences, and that has been met in the middle with the transformation of media. Mm-hmm. Obviously Alexander there mentioned the porn industry. There isn't really a porn industry in the way in which the 1990s there were big companies paying stars loads of money and pumping out VHS tapes. That's gone. What's been replaced with, and I know you mentioned the gig economy, Alexander, is OnlyFans. And we mentioned that OnlyFans brings in $1.3 billion in revenue every year. It has 80,000 content creators, but very, very few of them will ever make any money, any serious money, which is like the gig economy. But we were talking before about Max Clifford and the way in which the Murdoch press and through the 90s and noughties, through spectacular, salacious events, you could get yourself on the front page of newspapers every day and transform yourself, as you talked about, from the person who creates the pornographic film to the person who writes the novel, and saying, that this is I'd never do it again. And we have, as millennials, we have icons like that. I always remember Melinda Messenger, for example, presenting that show that was a bit like it was a escape show sort of thing, and that career ladder doesn't exist anymore. So you can see why individuals like Lily Phillips would avail themselves of it, but it is ever more alienated.
Yeah, and I was thinking that about how can you keep this going? How can you add more? I don't know, because we know that at least with pornography, that people start off at one place and it has to get progressively more, I guess, degenerate or extreme to have the same effect. But one thing that struck me when I was reading something about the documentary part is I thought, okay, well, I'm familiar that. Because basically, this is what she calls it a documentary, but it's a gangbang. Is basically what it is. I mean, although she was apparently she was in charge of it, and people want to make a lot of out of that when people want to try to point the finger, focusing on the men who lined up for it. But initially, as far as from my recall, it's not unusual in pornography for there to be like before the stuff happens. So they have the girl there, and and she's cleaned up, and she's they have her like some sort of anticipation about what's going to happen to her. But then after the end, that it just ends. I'm not going to say how those things normally end. We all know probably how they normally end. But it seems that with this might start a trend with. I hope it doesn't. But in addition to the gratuitous mechanical sex aspect of it, and the the things that happen at the end when you have a whole bunch of guys with one girl or one woman, is that they follow her after the fact. So just as it doesn't end when the guys are done, they follow her after the fact to kind of reflect on how she felt about it, how she's feeling now, the kind of like what you said, like, the regret or trying to process it, or, reflecting on how she only can picture the 10 out of the 100 guys that she slept with or that entered her that day. And I'm thinking, oh, this is like it's so in addition to the bodily, to the cheapening and the desacralization of that, now you have this another layer of, I guess, pornographic emotionality or something that I don't know if that's going to appeal to, they're going to try to appeal to women with that, or if men would be interested in that. I don't know.
No, I think, Tara, this is actually just a feature of the social media age. If you recall, it's civilization, and then the response, the ascent of man, when colour television had just been invented. To talk about sacrilege, there was a reverence for the presenter and the style in which that was, and if you watch someone like David Attenborough, who commissioned those programs, and he's that old, he commissioned those programs, he led the development of colour television, and when you watch his wildlife documentaries now, they have the same format. They have the same format where, we show the animals and all the beauty and the technicolor, the wonder of it. It's wonderful to watch. And then there's usually a 5 to 10 minute section on, we're the guys who made the film, and this is our feelings about the bird, and this is how we got the shot. And I think it's just that we live in an era where the leitmotif of television production or media production is that you're approachable, that you know who the person is, and that it's that world where you can tweet them, and I think that is really about the alienation that has been created by these media, trying to combat them and say, we are just Jim down the pub. You're not.
No, in many cases, you're very well paid, far above the average living standard of the average Brit or American, and you're not going to meet them in your local unless you, of course, you happen to live in the media-heavy bits of Manchester or London or Edinburgh. But this is the relatability aspect is a trick that, as Nick states in his contribution, it's a media trick. It's also a politician's trick. I think in our case, Blair was probably the first to market this, turning up and trying to pretend that this guy who went to Fettes, the elite, the Eton of Scotland, and was like a pure product of a family that was training him for a high position in the British state, that this guy was just Tony, not Anthony Charles Linton Blair, because that doesn't sound as friendly, but he was at least a half decent actor. Then he tried to get Gordon Brown to do it, and oh my God, we all remember the results of that. In the American case, it probably happened a bit earlier. You could see aspects of it with JFK, but the guy who they really pushed it for was, of course, Reagan. Approachable Ronnie. He's not the governor of California who thought the Black Panther should all be shot. He's just an approachable guy in a Stetson. And it is as bourgeois politics becomes ever more elitist and ever more divorced from any influence that the masses can hope to have over it, even in the small way that did perhaps exist in the immediate post-war era. The familiarity, I'm your mate crap just gets doubled down upon all the time until we reach the excruciating sight of David Cameron, the old Etonian, doing webcam videos. You get Theresa May trying to appear relaxed, which was a sight which I don't think the nation will recover from anytime soon. Then you get someone like Boris Johnson, who is, of course, and again, a good actor. So he can at least pull it off. And then, of course, you get Keir Starmer, a man more wooden than an entire forest worth of oak, who can't. Point about it all is they keep trying this, and they keep trying this even, and they keep doubling down on it, because there's nothing for nothing in terms of influence that can be had over politics, over bourgeois politics. The only thing that they can provide is a show of themselves. And I often found that it had become so heavily mediated, politics in Britain, and this was especially true in like the David Cameron era, that for a lot of people, opposition meant purely appearing on television and making a speech. That was it. I remember there was like certain politicians who were big for it about 10 years ago who would like lay into the Tories in Parliament, and it'd go on YouTube and people would say, yeah, go get it. What was it doing? Was it building serious opposition? No. Was it giving people a burst of like joy through like a mediated event? Yeah, that's what it was doing. And it's all part of the same thing. We're encouraged to be like, I am loath to go back to Guy Debord and the Society of Spectacle, but he was right about quite a few things. And the spectacle is what is endlessly provided. Bourgeois politics, just a spectacle. Human sexuality has just become a spectacle. Yeah, and everything that used to be organic has been reduced to the mechanical, as I was saying earlier. And that's the society that we live in now. It's I think it's, as I said, especially developed here in Britain, the oldest capitalist and the oldest imperialist country, where our deindustrialization, hyper-commodification and alienation has gone further than anybody else other than the United States, which has probably surpassed us in terms of degradation. But there's no way out under the existing balance of forces, because people are compelled economically to literally either prostitute themselves literally or prostitute themselves emotionally, or, as you were saying, to do both. So like Lily Phillips will do this, then go on and probably wail and weep and go on a half a dozen chat shows and say, I don't know what I was doing. That'll provide another media burst. And then maybe perhaps the finding of religion later on. Well, why not? I mean, that's another media round, isn't it? That's another book, My Path to God. Another book after that, My Path Away from God. And it's become as cynical as that. I mean, people had to go at like Mr. and Mrs. Markle, Harry and Meghan, because they are transparently playing that game. But they're just a higher end of the tree that everybody's playing. Mm-hmm. So like the supposedly dignified face of the British establishment goes and prostitutes itself to make money just the same way as an online influencer would. And you see like conservative types getting very uptight about this, and that always makes me laugh a little bit. And I thought, well, you helped us get to this point. It really, when it come down to it, for a lot of these like older like Tory types, you have to ask them, well, what did you expect when you shattered the remaining industry in Britain, when you destroyed so many communities, when you promoted a culture of rabid individualism above everything else? Where did you think it would end? What did you think Victorian values actually meant? Because it meant this. London in the 19th century infamously had one of the worst prostitution problems in the world. Frequently, because the rich were so enthusiastic users of prostitution. And so, you flip forward 150 years, you have a modern day version of that, higher level of technology, slightly different relations, but the same basic thing involved. And only now, as Nick was saying, it's not, a direct pimp, though sometimes it is anymore. It's a social media conglomerate. It's an OnlyFans, it's a Pornhub owned by serious financiers, traded on various stock markets, making huge returns for people. So again, things just repeat themselves at a higher and possibly even more obscene level.
All right. I wanted to just to backtrack a bit, because I don't know if you're familiar with Louise Perry. She came out with a book, I think it was the same time as what's her name, Mary Harrington. and this is just a picture of her. It's consent is not enough. But the book was The Case Against the Sexual Revolution. And I can't remember because it's been a while since I read that book. But the first part of it is quite what I would call like an historical materialist explanation of what brought about the sexual revolution. I don't know if she explicitly says that or not. Because she mentioned when you talked about before how a lot of these things were more elite, especially when you have these. This isn't the first time that sexual norms were transgressed or played around with, but it used to be more of at least the written record. I'm thinking of like the Book of Dangerous Liaisons or something, a more elite class stratus, elite aspect. But she talks about what happened in the 60s is that you had the material support of that, largely the pill, and also, appliances, regular electricity, all the stuff that reduced the amount of household labor that would be required in the home that would traditionally be made by women, and also the birth control that could back up all the norms that were being transgressed and questioned, I guess, from the 60s on, not just out of French theory, but I know out of the Marcuse School and the free love and all these things, which made this a different situation. So you kind of have this perfect storm from her thing of the technological, the kind of sources, or maybe we could say forces of social reproduction, or behind men and women's intimate relationships, with the appliances and all those conveniences for those who could afford them that become more widespread. And then the pill, of course, which took, for the first time, separated sex from reproduction, or the risk of becoming pregnant from sex in a way that women could control, and that was visible with the pills being taken. But so I don't know if she explicitly says that, but she does make a lot about what happened is the downside is that we're facing the consequences of now, or not wanting to reckon with. And what you would say is that there's a lot of people that recognize the issue but don't know what to do about it because they're missing important parts of the puzzle, which we would want to qualify as late stage, imperialism, late stage capital. Laura's here. I'm just going to bring her up. Hi, Laura. I'm in the middle of talking about Perry. Welcome. So she talks about disenchantment. And the name of the sociologist who talked about this, I can't remember if it was Durkheim or not. But I think that what would be a powerful critique is to kind of marry disenchantment with what we typically in Marxist critique call alienation. But we'll see if you agree or not. So what do we lose when sex becomes nothing special? Not just not sacred. So you have the Marriage Act, and because it's a union that could produce kids, and the vulnerability that comes along with that. But what do we lose when it becomes nothing? Focusing on how sex becoming nothing special, rather than we're freed up and we're exploring our sexuality and selling it for all kinds of things. So she uses disenchantment to describe the reduction of sex into something transactional, stripped of meaning and intimacy. And so she argues that the sexual revolution, for all its promises of freedom and empowerment, has left us disenchanted. Sex, she says, has been flattened into a purely physical act or mechanical act, like we talked about before, and Alexander made a powerful point of, divorced from emotional and relational dimensions that once made it significant. So it's no longer sacred, even special. It's been totally demystified to the point of banality or just, spectacle or whatnot. And so to contrast that, or to marry that with Marx's concept of alienation, so he didn't write about, at least that I can recall. I know that Engels wrote a bit about the family, but he didn't write about sex directly. But the idea that capitalism alienates us from our labor, ourselves, and each other is, I just see this as another species of that. So whereas workers are estranged from the products of our labor, modern sexual culture estranges us from emotional, relational aspects of intimacy. So we hear things like it's just sex, or sex work is work, or or you hear things even on college campuses in the UK and the US, kind of giving girls and young students, young women in particular, kind of like tips about how to supplement their income with OnlyFans, or I guess how to do it safely, or re-educating about consent. Who knows how they make themselves feel better about it. But the idea that not just, that sex and intimacy is something that's being consumed, traded, and performed. And we talked about, before Alexander came on, about how a lot of men in their 20s report they don't even have a close friend. People, a lot of, at least from the anecdotal evidence that I'm getting, is that a lot of men, even in their to the 20s or early 30s, late 20s, maybe are still a virgin, or the only kind of connection they have with the opposite sex is through these types of platforms. And I don't think you can get more alienated than that, to the point that I think I don't even know if they would know how to interact with an actual face-to-face encounter. So just to wrap this up here, we have this kind of, so it's I don't know if it's, I guess you could say it's a contradiction, but that you have that we'd argue that I think that this is a symptom of alienation and disenchantment, whatever we want to call it. And it also requires us to kind of suppress our instincts and emotional needs in favor of these ideologies that prioritize, consumption and spectacle and quick fixes and whatnot. So that's where she was trying to get at, that it's not the desacralization of sex and intimacy is not, it's not just about the degradation of the act, but also has this broader ramifications in terms of people partnering up and family formation. And one thing I wanted to ask all of you is, I was thinking in terms of what this means to the family, and that it could be that it's beneficial not just to the market or to capital accumulation, but also the state, to further erode the family and the relationships between men and women. And I think this is kind of, it plays into that as well. So I'll leave that there if anybody wants to comment on that before we move on to something else.
Very briefly, Tara, we have the world's richest man owning a social media platform, which might be argued to be exacerbating alienation, deeply concerned about falling birth rates across the Western world. And obviously the discourse around migrants and refugees and so on is either they're deracinating and destroying communities and undermining services, or the flip. This is the two sides of neoliberalism, or that they're necessary to pay for pensions with the falling birth rate. And no one wants to open Pandora's box and examine why actually families aren't being formed, or being formed later, or birth rates are falling.
Tara, you're muted.
Laura, do you want to say something? And you're in darkness. You're shrouded.
I'm sorry. I did my best to get.
Okay.
I had a that turned into an interview, and then
it's all right. Do you need a couple of minutes to collect yourself?
I'll jump in, and even though I've been absent for most of the conversation, I'm like a child that wanders into the middle of the film. I remember Nick talking about his wife. Oh, sorry, Eleanor, Nick's wife, talking about she's through turfing coming to started paying attention more to sort of moderate or even conservative sort of voices, like trad femme kind of women in the US, and how they're all convinced that there's a conspiracy to destroy the traditional family by making men and women have to work, so everyone has to earn a wage, and thereby they destroy the family, as if the end goal is the destruction of the family as opposed to two people working. Like the problem there is that two wages are necessary to to support a family. It's not like there's some like secretive, deep state plot. Like that's it. That's what they get out of it. In the same way that what they get out of sex work is women being easy to exploit, and no one wanting to particularly prosecute people that do that. But yeah, sorry, that's he said.
Yeah. Do you want to say something, Alexander and Nick?
Well, I think the conservatives see a communist conspiracy every time they see a symptom of capitalism, whether it's family destruction, where it must be the commies who are plotting to do it, and they're in charge, strangely, of the state and all the major employers. But every time this happens, you get a whole bunch of explanations, all of which avoids the two central issues. One of which was that women's mass entry into the labor force, in British and American terms, came at a time when the 20+ year post-war upswing was coming to an end. So women workers enter more into the labor force when British capitalism is on the slide. And so what happens is that the British capitalist class manipulates the situation and pushes women into, of course, more low-wage work, and uses the availability of a bigger section of the population as exploitable labor as one of the means by which they seek to suppress wages. That's just capitalism being capitalism. That's just the capitalist class acting as they do. If they destroy families along the way, well, they don't really care about that. It doesn't matter because there's the same attitude they had in the 19th century still reigns, which is, well, there's plenty more where they came from. If the ones that we've got domestically won't breed enough, well, we'll find others that will. Doesn't matter where they come from. Maybe we'll loose a bunch of jihadists in their country, destroy it, and then we'll bring some over here, and they can make up for the shortfall in the birth rate. I mean, if that seems like utterly cruel cynicism, well, that's just how capitalism is. And if more and the problem that we've got at the moment, as I think you and I have discussed before, Tara, which is that the problem is that when you get all of this stuff, whether it's the pushing of prostitution as liberation, whether it's the gender ideology stuff, or whether it's the destroy a country and steal its workforce stuff, what you've got is a bunch of people on the right who keep screaming about communism and communist plots, and a bunch of people on the left who keep saying, yeah, but this is a good thing. So what you've got is basically a political debate between really two different halves of the ruling class. The working class voice got, in British terms, pretty much destroyed and pushed out of the equation probably about 40 years ago and hasn't come back yet. And so most of what we think of as the left, which runs around making excuses for all the alienation and miseries of capitalism, is just really they're doing the work of the left end of the ruling class. That's what they're doing. They're not a representation of the working class, either in Britain or the United States. And again, this comes back to our problem, which is when a lot of people see all these things happening and see the horrors that the system's producing, the only people producing critiques of it that get any purchase are people on the right. So they end up going towards them because the left seems bizarre, insane, and embracing of alienation. Whereas at least people say, well, at least people on the right acknowledge there's a problem. Problem is that they don't have any solutions either, other than trust in Elon Musk, vote for Donald Trump, or vote for Nigel Farage. Not exactly the way forward for anybody, particularly anybody who's working class in this country, but that's the situation that bourgeois politics has got into now.
Yeah, what I would say is that I think it comes to the fact that there's an acknowledgement of the problem, because this to see what's going on, because you can see that people are getting married later or partnering up later. There's birth rates are falling. There's this this what we've been talking about the OnlyFans and porn, and people getting their gratification mediated by the market and the screens and all that. So of course that's going to have an impact on people partnering up. But I think what Laura says, they want to make that that's the goal, the end goal was just to divide up the family and to create to atomize us and all that for whatever whatever that may be. demonic, I guess, is a big thing now that I've heard, been saying hearing a lot more of on the right. It's demonic. Whereas it could be what you had said, Alexander, and Laura, that it wasn't the aim, but it's a consequence of it. But if you have people who have to depend on the market or the state for more things than they do on their comrades and their family, well, they're easier to control. I think that's just, they're more isolated. So I think that, whereas, and it could be, I think, what I'd ask you this, if you think it's kind of that we can't really say like ahistorically what the relationship is between undermining the family and capitalism, the same way as it's with women in capitalism, because they get pushed in, they get pushed out. So the consequences and whether or not, or when those become profitable or not, or useful or not politically, I think are historical questions. So I don't know. I think that I think there definitely is something that's beneficial. The weakening of the family structure, and more and more people staying single longer and longer. That wasn't a direct effort, but it does make OnlyFans and all that kind of stuff a lot of money to keep guys and isolated and paying for their OnlyFan connection, their OnlyFan girlfriend, than having a real one. I don't know if that was a bit rambly, but I think that there's I wouldn't dismiss and I'm not saying that you would, that the obvious consequences that are that these changes that the current situation is having on family and intimacy and all that type of stuff the last 30 or 40 years. I can't hear you, Laura. Do you want to say something?
Sorry. I was thinking of that quote, is it in the Communist Manifesto, where it says, all that is sacred will be profaned, all that is, so basically everything, you don't look to capitalism to uphold the family structure, it's like everything that matters to people, like that happened when people had to leave home to find work. It happens when people have to spend more time away from their children. These are material, like, realities of our, economy, our society, whatever. So the problem is, these right wingers, they don't have any more materialism than the left does. They're blaming everything. You know what I mean? So we've got a situation, like that thing of poverty breeds sin. Like, when you've got a situation where people don't have housing, where they don't have access to healthcare, where there's no safety net. So in Glasgow, for example, with the homeless situation, you've got like these ghetto sort of hotels that are being set up for homeless people, and then you've got separate ones for asylum seekers.
Mm-hmm.
And around those hotels, you end up getting a lot of drug pushing, a lot of sex trafficking, a lot of crime, and they become less safe areas, and everybody notices it in the city. But when it's asylum seekers, the right goes, well, there you go. It's because they come from a foreign culture and they don't respect women, and that's why they're all acting up. Well, that doesn't explain why we get exactly the same problems outside the hotels that are full of Scottish people. It's not about, being predisposed because of the kind of person you are to do these kinds of behaviors. It's about what happens when you're left languishing in a homeless hotel for up to 53 weeks, being targeted by pushers and pimps, surrounded by scary men in a scary situation. Anybody would go down that route. So it's, that's just a lack of materialism all around. It's like, it's very easy to talk about abstract. But it's true, I keep coming back to this thing of like, why does the left say this? That's not a left-wing position. And Alexander's right, because the left. That's why nobody's saying like, that sex workers experience alienation, because they don't believe in the idea of alienation. The idea that people would be psychologically affected by the kind of work they do every day is a very Marxist thing, and so obviously it's the same for women. I've known sex workers, and it's awful. You walk into a room and you just constantly find them checking pictures of their body parts and like, you know, editing, and it just becomes a whole psychology, and it's really sad. It's just one of the many symptoms, you know. Could be. It's a buyer's market. The idea that, you know, there's some kind of wealth of opportunity for girls to take their clothes off and make money. I mean, there's a lot of women out there willing to do that now.
And before I ask Alexander or Nick to respond to that, I think that's I think it's important to know that this kind of they're selling this stuff, like they'll highlight Lily Phillips, although she's, you know, a wealthy but tragic figure, or a few people are like, oh, this person made $1 million, or some other person made $38 million on that, where the vast majority of people on OnlyFans are not making that much money, so they don't get the monetary payoff for whatever goes on psychologically when you have to kind of, you know, when you have to I don't want to psychoanalyze people, but I think that also, because this is something that Lily Perry brings up, and I think she mentioned the book Paid For, which is from a former sex worker. I don't know if we're supposed to use that term or not. Anyway, but that said that it takes a lot, that it takes a lot of effort. And so when Lily Phillips says she was training herself to be able to do 1,000 men a day, which I don't even think is possible time-wise, but that's beside the point. That I think part of the training is suppressing her natural instinct to be revulsed by having sex with men she's not wanting to have sex with. And that even though you can consent to being like, okay, yeah, I realize that I'm going to get money, and the guy's going to do this to me. So there's consent. That's a legal thing. But the psychological overterm damage you have to do to train yourself to disassociate, or to not actively react to the yuck factor when there's somebody you're not into at all on top of you're doing whatever, I think is a price that is not often. I think that's something that doesn't often come up in terms of the actual costs, and why sex work, we would argue, is not, a hairdresser or something like that. But a lot of left people will say, or even think it should be like, somehow it'll be better if we unionize prostitution and decriminalize it and all this stuff, that somehow that'll be great because sex work is work and women should be able to make their choices and this type of thing. I don't know. Alexander, can you think of any valid Marxist argument for this sex work is work position?
No, but that's a rather short answer. I mean, I was at a union conference 10 years ago where this was debated, and it was debated on lines that you've just been describing there, Taro. And it was presented. I was in the Public and Commercial Services Union, the Civil Servants Union, and it was presented as this great positive thing that that prostitution is going to happen anyway. So wouldn't it be better if it was all legal? And at the time, I didn't have the understanding that I do now. So my branch at the time voted in favor of the motion to support unionization of what was referred to as sex workers, because, we didn't think about it at the time. Thinking about it now, in hopefully in much greater detail, what we were essentially doing was endorsing a pimps union. That's what we were doing. Probably not an unfamiliar thing for the actions of the TUC, but there you go. But the point is that there's no good argument for this. What you're essentially arguing for is like, here's an incredibly negative and incredibly wretched situation that capitalism has created. The way out of it is to do what? To say that it can somehow be made good. I mean, we don't want like women or men who are forced to like sell themselves to be sent to prison. But the idea that this is something that is liberatory and should be celebrated, which is what you get from a lot of the left, and especially the United States these days, but also here and also France as well, is a ridiculous statement to make, and it's not backed up by, of course, anything within the Marxist canon whatsoever. What it's backed up by is a load of post-1960s theory that basically revolves around postmodernism. These sort of bastardizations of Foucault. It's bastardizations of the various other post-structuralists, rather than anything to do with Marxism. And it comes down to the fact that they have, a lot of these leftists have internalized this idea that we must push the envelope of personal freedom further, and somehow if we keep doing that, then capitalism will collapse somehow. No, what it'll do is it'll just say, see what you're doing and say, that's a good market, we'll take it over and we'll do it on an industrial scale. That's what will happen. And it's what happens with anything that gets like pushed through the legalization process. Like I spoke to somebody a while ago about who lived in Portland, USA, where like there's open like legalized weed. And what happens is, of course, it goes from like artisan weed stores to the cigarette companies making it and selling it in vast quantities, in a form that is just as harmful as an old Marlboro Red, basically. And that's what you get under capitalism. Now, it's the same when you got people. I used to argue a lot with like anarchists about, we need to abolish the family now and that kind of thing. It's like, well, what the hell does that even mean? Capitalism's doing a good job of that on its own. It doesn't need you, Mr. Black top wearing anarchist, to help it. But again, like I had this argument recently online with people who swore they were Marxists and said, "Oh, Engels said abolish the family," and I said, "No." He said that what he wrote in Origin of the Family, Private Property and the State was that under socialism, the family would evolve into a socialistic form, just as under capitalism, the family evolved into a bourgeois form. And the argument of Marxists in the 20th century was that we wanted socialism to remove the material want aspect that destroys family life, in order that we can actually build stronger family units that aren't crippled by material want and deprivation and alienation and all the toxic consequences of capitalism. That's what we actually want. We want to make something which is more stable, not less, which is not destroyed by alienation and hyper individualization. But again, like we are in a situation where the bulk of the left for over 30 years has worshipped all of this as a supposed path to liberation, whereas in actual fact, they're just a bad, to inadvertently quote Fight Club, a copy of a copy of a copy of the radicals of the 1960s, whose legacy ultimately is one of failure, because they failed to consider how they were throwing in their liberatory struggle into an unholy alliance with capitalism in its hyper degenerate phase.
Thank you. Nick, Laura, do you want to say something?
Well, I mean, I come from a different philosophical perspective as a syndicalist, but I broadly agree with everything that Alexander said. I'd only know certain things. Whichever country it is in the Western world, when you poll women in general, and obviously it's a generalism, but when you poll women, they generally want around 2 children. And then we have these huge contradictions. 7% of the English are landlords. Around 4% of the Scottish are landlords, right? And you have this huge extractive process which creates housing insecurity, and that's actually been driven by the state as a deliberate policy, really since the 1980s, drawing down on public housing, privatizing it, demolishing it. Myself and Laura have been heavily involved in a number of recent struggles around trying to preserve our public housing, and that's being removed in order to create a new market. And then, as I said, I mentioned Mary Whitehouse before and the kind of conservative reaction against liberalism, but it wasn't all wrong. The idea that we should regulate, it's just gone. Australia is having some kind of rearguard action with its ban on social media for under 16s. However, that's going to work. to me, it seems the horse is bolted. But we're just in this position where we talk about the family. Just a personal example. A dear friend of mine killed himself in his 20s out of alienation and a lack of ability to connect. So, this is growing, and it is a contradiction in capitalists, not just there's no design. It's a contradiction. You've got for some aspects of capital, say landlords, the fact that young people can't get together and form meaningful relationships and have a family is irrelevant. It's not part of their business model. But at the same time, that depresses the ability of for example, the British working class to purchase things. So you have these contradictions, but it's all a great malaise.
Guys, I have to jump out now. But Antara, you're muted, by the way.
Sorry, my kids are making noise. Thank you. All right. Any final thoughts about, I don't know, I guess we're just gonna have to do it ourselves, because even with the Judy Bindel and the feminists that are on this, they still want to, it seems like they're stuck in the moralization loop.
They think that they can trigger enough outrage and something will change. But that isn't just them. That, like, the Julie Bindels have access to, the major national media. Everybody online thinks, well, enough outrage and something will happen. But of course, they're all stuck in a purely idealist mentality. Like, it takes a material change, as Nick was indicating. It's like it's material problems that are creating all of this. The hyperalienation, the inability to make decent human connections, the inability to even just relate to a person of the opposite or the same sex, depending upon what your preferences are, in person, is all just, it makes me glad I was born in the 80s, because at least we were brought up having to relate to people face to face. But this is the world that's been created now. And it's until the material incentives to invest in this are removed, then it's all you're going to get. And the only way that you're going to be able to remove that is basically if you, leaving you on a revolutionary note, if the working class is organized enough to push this completely degenerate ruling class out of power, because they're not going to change. They're not going to change. The only way we will see a serious revival in all aspects of our lives and culture is if the working class in whatever country we're in is organized enough to actually first beat the ruling class in major industrial battles and major political battles, and then at least rebuild working class politics in a way that it is separated from bourgeois politics, in a way that you had for a while in the 20th century, even in Britain, which had its problems. It certainly didn't have a mass communist parties or mass communist-inspired trade unions like the French or the Italians did, or anything like that. But we had serious areas of the country where there was a real working class political culture. The place I'm originate, South Manchester, was one of those. There's plenty of areas in Scotland that counted as that, like the old coalfields, for instance, the old shipbuilding areas, the old steel towns of Yorkshire. And that was annihilated quite deliberately. It was principally motivated by profit, but it was also motivated by a desire to annihilate the working class's political culture. And so we need to be focusing on things like rebuilding that as a starting point, because unless we rebuild working class politics as a clear and coherent entity, then all the working class is going to be getting is two different halves of the same bourgeoisie, giving them two different bits of crap. Idealist nonsense from the right, idealist damaging socially destructive stuff from the left, and we need the class to break out of that. And I'll leave my comments there. So Thanks to you, Tara, for having me on, and good to meet you, Nick, and you, Laura, as well. Hope to see you again sometime.
Thank you very much, Alexander. I really appreciate it. I know that you were right up to the point. You already had two streams today. So everybody check out Alexander McKay. I'll put his link in the description, especially the Rise and Fall, Empire Rise and Fall. Is that
Decline and Fall? It's
Decline and Fall. Kit
myself
Clarenberg,
and
yeah?
Comrade Kit Clarenberg, our man in Serbia. Yes.
Yes. All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
See you next
See you
time.
now.
All right. So let's unmute people. All right. So let's see, what time is it? Oh, it's 20. So it's 9:10. How much time do you guys have? I want to be cognizant of that.
I'm fine.
Okay, cool. Let's roll, baby. Anything you want to say, Laura? Before we move on to the funnier
all
part,
right.
which is looking at the reactions online. Oh God.
Oh
And we
god.
can put out the
Oh,
material.
can I
Go ahead.
sorry, can I read you one that I found earlier? Because actually, well, no, I'm gonna have to turn my laptop on. It's gonna take about a year, so you go ahead. But yeah, some of the reactions have been amazing. Glenner was all right. I saw he put one up that was just sort of saying, well, A, this isn't empowerment, but you know, just that like collectively this is a failure of humanity, which I thought was a good way to sum it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nick, do you want to say anything to what Alexander left us with before we go on to the?
Well, I mean, Alexander and I imagine we would have philosophical differences about the fine nature of socialist theory, but what he was saying about the left, I really think it is the neoliberal left. It's the left of the right. That's what we're talking about when we talk about what we call the modern day left. There's a phrase in Scots that I particularly like, it's an axiom to live by. Opportunities makes a thief, right?
Okay.
So, you know, people are creatures of habit, and they are, you know, by nature opportunists in general, right? That's how we live our lives. You know, an opportunity presents itself, you take it. And if you go about deracinating, destroying, you know, expunging safeguards, well, you know, you're going to get the outcome that it's like if you left your wallet on a counter in a bus. Is it any surprise someone nicked it? And it's really the same with OnlyFans or anything like that. You know, once you break down the safeguards, that's why I've been focusing on Mary Whitehouse, who is a hated figure in British political culture and was a hypocritical right-wing conservative. But she wasn't entirely wrong. The point she was making is, if we say anything goes, then any amount of filth, any amount of degradation goes. And at the time when she was defeated, finally, you know, the liberal establishment, you know, the likes of the, in fact, have I got news for you? Make comments about it, but you know, the earlier version of establishment comics and so on pilloried her. But you know, she has been broadly proven right, and that's the interesting thing, is that socialists and conservatives often come up the same point because we believe that there is such a thing as society. We want it to be totally different, but we believe it exists. And for liberals, the only thing that exists is the individual. And Lily Phillips is just an example of an individual pursuing their destiny. You know, it's that there's no such thing as society. There's only individual and their families, or you know, the equivalent. You know, anyone over 30 who's riding a bus is a failure.
Yeah.
Right? You know, we're in a world where that is the position of the left. You know, you can be an upper middle class dominatrix and make, you know, your 500 quid a month alongside your other job, because it's fun and titillating for you.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, we're going to ignore the systemic oppression that creating those conditions creates. And I mean, I used to holiday quite a lot in Berwick, and there's a little ditty on a lot of Berwick pubs, and it talks about a bonny lass in every close. Right. Now, Berwick was an army town, so what they mean is a prostitute in every close. So, you know, there was a poor, rough army town in the Middle Ages. And we've got to a position where instead of, 500 prostituted lasses in Berwick, you've got 80,000 prostituted lasses that you can Google.
Mm. Do you want to say something, Laura?
Yeah, she's grim. It's so grim. But it's true that people who justify the sex workers work kind of messaging, they always take the most, the most sanitized version of it that they can. Or, well, I mean, not that the Lily Phillips situation is sanitized exactly. It's pretty out there with how horrible it is. But a rich woman, a rich white woman, that they can make all the arguments that there's no element of coercion and under, there's no minority oppressed group that they belong to, because obviously women don't count for them. But it's great. But obviously, like Nick says, the lower end, and I don't think it's Lily Phelps' fault, that women are being raped in homeless accommodation, and that's not, her personal decisions, but it's the same material situation that is creating that. And at the lower end, if you want, the end where people are the most vulnerable, that equates to why not have sex with someone in exchange for a place? Like, why not? There's no end to that. So yeah, I think people need to think about what they're legitimizing. But again, the people that legitimize that, you can call them the left, but I don't consider these people to be the left. I don't consider liberals to be of the left. For me, I would consider somebody who actually wants to change the sort of system in society so that it puts people above profit. That's in some way. Those are the people that I continue to consider being left. But yeah, a lot of this messaging, it's not coming from that. It's coming from celebrities. It's coming from artists and kind of academia, and other kind of sectors of the middle class that we look to for stuff. But I don't know anybody who's actually involved in frontline services that deals with women's shelter, women's aid, or women in these situations who think that sex work is glamorous or a viable option on any of their family.
Sorry, Laura. Nick, how is her sound to you? Is it creaking in and out, or does it sound good to you?
A little bit. I'm hearing her.
Okay, good. Sorry, Laura. I just wanted to make sure people could understand you.
This is a new phone as well.
Well, I don't know. It's karma. No. Yeah, I think that, and it's hard to get into this thing because when you have this idea like who's left, who's not left, because we're in this thing where anyone can say they're the left, and then you have people who have larger platforms or I guess what we want to call it, can gatekeep, or they get kind of like this, the exemplar of it. But I think something has happened. There came this thing that, I don't know if the cultural left or the economic left, but this idea that affirming everything is great. Like somehow you just affirm and destigmatize, and it's kind of this libertine, freaks to the front type of whatever. And of course, there could be outliers. I mean, it's hard for us to think that even though Lily apparently comes from a fairly well-off background and is making lots of money, it's hard for anyone to be like, well, how happy could she be doing this? And who knows what kind of goals she sets for herself. But it's the idea that, the outlier, even if, let's say she's fantastically fulfilled by this. I mean, I doubt it, but the outlier doesn't make the rule. And it's also, it's quite different that if you have to do this, or you don't have very many other options, than not doing it. Also, just the toll. You know, of course, if you're doing any kind of physical work, it takes a toll. But this also, even if you know all the Johns are you know, no one's beating you or whatever, it's still is eating away at you, because again, this idea that you have to push down, you know, nobody wants to have sex with someone they don't want to have sex with. I mean, it sounds trite, but they're able to have to do that day in and day out. That can't be healthy. And I remember, I might have said this to you once, Laura, too, because whenever I get into this thing about, sex work, and if they want to do it, and sex work is work, and what's the problem? And I go, I just wish that anybody who really thought that would like just go down to a dock and just give blowjobs to the first 3 guys willing to pay you £20, and then get back to us.
Yeah.
About how,
If it's good
I don't
enough
know.
for them, why just work, right?
Yeah. And just because you call something work, there's lots of things that people shouldn't have to do, or as soon as we're able to mechanize it, people shouldn't have to do certain things. But again, I agree with you that the idea that coming from the left, it should be like, yeah, are you ever going to totally get rid of prostitution? Probably not. But our goal should be to organize society in such a way that it's not a huge thing. It shouldn't be celebrated. And you know, it should be the goal that you don't have to pay somebody to have sex, and someone isn't in the situation where that's their best option or their least worst option. I mean, that you would think that would just be common sense.
I mean, back in like 2011 or something, when I was a student still, and it was around the time that like the first concerted effort to use identity politics to like destroy materialist feminism were sort of, you know, coming into effect. So I remember at the time, like a whole bunch of women against cuts to various services trying to get together and get organized and have like a feminist activist group. And it was infiltrated by trans women on day one. And even though everyone said they were happy for it to be trans inclusive, it was completely destroyed within one meeting because it just ended up in a big argument about what inclusivity meant. And I remember at that event hearing about this thing that happened down in London, where some very nice middle class students or graduate types decided to set up a day school for sex workers to like help them get unionized and understand their position and lobby for themselves and all this sort of stuff. And they were setting up a website and maybe a museum or something to go with it. And I did a quick Google search and immediately found that, like, well, actually, there are already websites and groups that exist that are set up by you know, people that work in the sex trade, and there are a lot of forums and things where they swap advice on things like how to keep yourself safe and healthy, and also stuff like about how to sell yourself and like what kind of market, what type of pictures to do and use and stuff. But a lot of very practical stuff about just how to get guys to follow some rules and keep yourself a bit safe and hide your money, etc. So that, you know, a lot of it was really grim. Like the people on these websites were not trying to make out that this was a glamorous like lifestyle that they were living. They were saying that this is really dangerous. Here's what you'll face. Here's who to go to for support. That these lovely middle class people were swooping in out of nowhere, going, "Hey, we're gonna tell you sex workers how to organize."
Hand out condoms and you
Yeah,
know
it's
what
not the
consent
same.
means. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, but for all that it's not the same, and the people that I knew that were doing it were kind of doing it out of, I mean, it's need, right? There's a coercion element there because it's like at the end of the day, we all need to work to feed ourselves, and that's why it's exploitative. So sex work is exploitative in the same way that all forms of work are exploitative, right? But there's that. But the people I knew weren't doing it out of like an immediate need. Like there was maybe stuff they could have looked into getting jobs, like they had other options, but it appealed to them because they were floating about kind of middle class ish lefty liberal circles where it's just so cool and it makes you like this incredible, rare, species of person that everybody wants to hang out with and have a party. Is like, oh, she does sex work. And they kind of got into it through like modeling. There's this thing where you end up with a friend and he's polyamorous and he's got a camera and all his girlfriends let him take pictures of him, and then it kind of goes from that into, well, maybe I would do a video, and next thing they were making bespoke videos of themselves for like 50 quid a pop for like some creeps in America. And you're like, that's not bad. I'm sorry. That's just, and they didn't see it themselves, but in a way they can't. They're in denial in the same way that all these people are doing. But it's sad because they're actually materially being affected by it. And these same attitudes that are luxury attitudes that you can have perfectly comfortably when you don't actually have to live with it. But at the point that they were having sex for money, they were contracting STDs off these creepy polyamorous dudes with cameras that they knew, and they were still telling themselves, oh, it's empowering, it's great, oh, society's so foolish, blah blah blah. And it's just a story you have to tell yourself then at that point.
Yeah, as if the norm's the problem rather than the practice. I mean,
you don't want
to. Again, I just want to reiterate that none of us. I know that none of us are advocating the throwing women who are involved in this in jail or anything like that. It's again trying to change the force in relations so that as few as people as possible find themselves with this having to choose this.
I don't judge the women that do it. I think Lily Phillips is a very sick woman, and I think she's sick in a way that society kind of encourages women to be. And I think sometimes being wealthy will save you from that. But I've also known wealthy women who've been abused by their fathers as children. I've known wealthy women who've been in horrible relationships. And one of the things that woman can be, to see yourself purely in terms of your value to men or how much attention you can get them. And sometimes that is a route and security. Sometimes not a great route though.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing that people will show to be like when people are trying to cast her as being, ill, unwell, exploited, a victim, this type of this sort of thing. And of course, it depends on, more than one thing can be true at the same time. Yeah. So, but it's, to me, it's like, it's not the point in trying to figure out what's going on in her head. Is she bad, good, or whatever? The thing is, if you look at this as any other way, as other than a sign of a problem in the culture, the political economy, I just don't, the other stuff I think is just virtue signaling and wanting to feel, moralizing and whatnot about, I don't know, wanting it to be pointing the fingers. It's the men, it's the women, it's the this, it's the that. And okay, but how does this get at the even begin to get at the crux of the issue? I don't know. But speaking of which, Julie, to how this has been characterized or framed, especially in social media, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this episode, is to bring in a political economic critique, a Marxist critique, and also, bring in the idea that this is also an outcome of the quote unquote sexual revolution, at least how it's transpired under conditions of capitalism and kind of this morass that we find ourselves in. So you have a lot of women, for whatever reason, some of it mostly economic, or as an avenue for fame or notoriety or whatever, as in this case. But I think also what I wanted to also introduce, and it's harder to do, is that I think it's problematic to let's just use the 100 guys who participate in this. Now, they were her paid members, and my guess is they kept their names anonymous. And it's that, they could be perverts, predators, sexual opportunists. That's okay. But I'm also thinking that that we talked about before is that there's this growing phenomena of a lot of those, my guess would be, and I have no way of knowing this, is that a lot of those guys, this could have been the first, the only contact they've had with the woman in that way. They are her OnlyFans members. I can't see most men are wanting to share the fact that they participated in that. I mean, I could be wrong because I'm not a man. But I think we also have to. I think it's interesting that the especially from the feminist side or the side that are wanting to give Lily a tremendous amount of subjectivity and compassion, don't have any of that for the men who were for the 100 men involved, and maybe they don't deserve it. But I can't see that being a very happy or healthy place that you were to participate in that type of thing. So I think what I'm trying to say is that the alienation is also pronounced on the man's side and the young men's side as well. Not to excuse, bad behavior or exploitive behavior, but I just think it's problematic to categorize all the men who participate, who join, who pay to where that all the money that OnlyFans makes comes from. So the girl, a lot of the girls are, the women like her, or the women provide the product, and the market is largely the men. And I think that there's nothing really too exciting about that either. I guess I want to throw that out there to get your comment, Laura, because I think that I think I saw something that you said online that, no good guy would be in that line. Which I totally agree that the act itself is not a good act, but that, can we have, or do we need to have some sort of at least critical compassion for the guys who would, line up for this?
Yeah, it is a problem that we, in the same way that we have this kind of individualistic kind of attitude for everything else, we like to imagine that men rape or pay for sex or do any number of things that we might not consider in tune with our values, because they are some kind of unique monster psychopath, that is an outlier in society, and I think that's true. I think there's like a tiny minority of like proper psychopaths out there that will just maybe always be with us, but generally, yeah, I think it's a cultural thing. I think if you have a culture that permits something, and if you have material circumstances that are creating, the conditions where things are, like people are in a more vulnerable situation, that's where you're going to get these things happening more. So I don't think it's really very helpful to just think of men who do these things as weird outlier. It's not really much use monitoring them. It's a question of why have we reached a point in society where this is like a fun thing for some guy to engage in.
The whole thing to me sounds, because she was saying that she can only like picture like 5 or so, and which is sad. But the whole thing, that had, nothing, there's nothing appealing about that event to me. It's one thing to be the first one, but to be like my God, I don't even.
Men do surprise me, to be fair, with what they will, things that they will do. We hold ourselves to a higher moral standard, and we are held to a higher moral standard by all of society, and yet somehow we're expected to let them run everything. I don't understand how these same people that are making all the decisions are simultaneously telling us, I can't be trusted to make decisions. What am I supposed to do if someone opens their legs? But say no if she's pretty, mentally unwell, or it's a weird situation. You can say no to that. Men can't say no. It's not natural to line up, I think, in a group of men.
Yeah, I didn't watch the documentary, full disclosure. I saw little I read commentaries on it, but I thought about doing it, and I was just like, yeah, I don't want to. Because I know that I go to bed at night and it'll be popping in my mind. I'm like, oh, I don't want to, to think about it. But Nick, before I go rambling on, do you want to say something at this point?
Well, I think there's a point to be made here about the revolution in media, because she's attempting to beat a record set, I think, in Poland in the 1990s, back when there was a pornography industry and there was, people were selling VHS tapes. And I forget the number, but, some woman had over 900, and she's attempting to beat that in an era where, if we compare what the woman that experienced that was doing, she was being coerced by a production company. And this is someone who is chasing a salacious attention for their own ends, which will probably be very harmful to them. But it is a feature of the change in the media landscape. Certainly, I think in the actual communication she's talked about, she's getting less than 2 minutes with each individual guy. There's clearly this is not human connection.
No, and that's what I said. But she's thinking I haven't done the math, and I don't. Not that it matters. I mean, it's enough. But I'm thinking, could you because if it was 100 and each guy had 5 minutes with her, so it was just like five minutes, and then either
you've been teasing this out all night, and this is the point. Each of these people are people who've paid her money, so they feel that they have some kind of relationship.
They're her OnlyFans members, is my understanding. So they already had.
So these people are craving some kind of human contact,
and this gave them a
They're not
chance to
going to get
actually.
it, but
Apparently, there's a whole screening I mean, I don't know from what she said, and even I guess her mom is her financial manager, so it gets kind of whatever. But is that they had to be screened to make sure that they were of age, and that I guess had to bring maybe like an STD test result or something. I'm not sure how it happened, but my understanding is that when they decided to do this, it was offered to her OnlyFans, and I don't know if I would assume they would have to pay to do it, or I don't know if that would be problematic with the law because it happened in an Airbnb in London, so I don't know what the prostitution things are there.
Well, this is why if we go back to the 90s when this happened last time, it was a really coercive thing from the very tail end of the pornography industry when they were competing against the rise of the internet.
Yeah. So anyway, let's see. Go ahead.
This quote that somebody had tweeted this earlier today, and I think it's just perfect because I thought she was talking about the men, but actually she's talking about Lily Phillips, but it could equally apply to either. So this is it. The sickening part is in today's culture, they actually don't see anything wrong with this. Somewhere in life, they will keep sinking and not know why. It's the emptiness from knowing that you are nothing but an object. Society made you think it's normal.
Yeah, and for also, I guess, I mean, it's and so in terms of the lack of a materialist component to the left thing, so we have Julie Bindel, and she, this was kind of surprising to me. She wrote not her article. So she wrote an article, I think it was last week, called "Shame on the Men Exploiting Lily Phillips." And she wrote, Lily Phillips, who had sex with 101 men in a single day in October, has hit the headlines. But the focus should be on the men that exploited her, the men that queued up to have sex with her. Okay. Now, this caused quite a kerfuffle online. And actually, she was heavily ratioed on this. So a lot of people took issue with her wanting to cast Lily as being exploited and the 101 men being the exploiters. And for anybody who's, so this was the one thing. So this was the one that got a lot of response. And also, what's his name? Konstantin Kisin. His response to her also got a lot of there's a lot of back and forth. So Caroline Hardman wrote back that it makes me angry that men all have their anonymity and yet she will never be able to escape it. And it's like, okay, well, fair enough, but yeah, and I can see why people are pushing back on this particular case. If they want to just focus on this particular case, and because to bring up that, her mom's her manager, she apparently makes $2 million a year. She has set up this, we can think of the goal of what we want, and we can think that, that it's most people would have a negative response to the whole situation, I would imagine, but not everybody. But the idea that that the men, that was part of the deal. She probably maybe she didn't want to share the notoriety with the men. I mean, I don't know why that was the deal. If they wanted, that the names and even the documentary that, and for Shot, who's asking about the film, there's a documentary about the before and after. I haven't watched, I've only seen previews of it. I don't think the documentary is actually of the sex. It's focusing on her. I think it's mainly like focusing on the experience of it. You can imagine. So they have shots of her beforehand, I guess, preparing for it, and then, I guess afterwards and whatnot, and then maybe a little bit afterwards, that's where people are talking about the emotionality. But I don't think that the documentary is actually, I think that's why they can call it a documentary, because it doesn't actually show the 101 interactions. But I can't say for sure. Maybe that's only on our OnlyFans account. I don't know. So Matt Walsh, of course, is going to chime in here. Feminists demand that we celebrate a woman's sexual freedom, but then when she makes a really terrible choice, they suddenly claim that she's a damsel in distress and capable of exercising even the most basic judgment. It's a joke. The men who took part in this are disgusting. So is the woman. Any comment? Anybody want to say? Go ahead.
There are a range of competing discourses here.
Yeah.
So, the most that there's a black skin, white masks thing of colonized peoples. The most extreme I've seen that is in ruling class women in England, because they're essentially clothes hangers and people who are there to make parties go well, and they have their children taken away from them, and they're highly sexualized to an extent that working class people never know. I memean, I have some ruling class female friends from England, and they'll do things like hold your hand or come and sit in your lap that you just it blows your mind. Like, why would you do this? And they're just doing that to lubricate the social world around them. And I don't know a Lily Phillips class background, but I have heard her accent, and it's quite rarefied. So
she's apparently I don't know if it's wealthy, but like upper middle class is my understanding. So, and she did this. She started this during COVID. Well, she was I think a freshman or sophomore in college, and then I guess it took off, and she just decided to do it.
The fact that her mother is her pimp, that is, that. This is the kind of thing that's almost unheard of in ordinary people's lives. So you've got that discourse going on, but equally, someone like Julie Bindel, who, I agree with a lot of what she says, but Lily Phillips is not the bleeding edge of feminism right now. Like Julie Bindel is a British Jewish woman, and Britain is right now genociding a people group.
Is she Jewish? Oh, now that makes more sense to me. Sorry.
Yes. So,
I didn't know she was Jewish.
And I haven't seen her make a single comment on that. Our government is running spy plane flights out. I mean, for example, today a physician was killed, a hospital physician, and the targeting for that bomb will have been done by a British spy plane. And 14 months of genocide, not a single word.
No, she's only made a couple of comments, and everything was just to disparage people who go to pro Hamas. She would call them pro Hamas rallies. So
Right. So
I was wondering why she was so. Okay, thanks.
Well,
Now I know
either way, I just feel that like these discourses are coming together here. You've got what is a historic sort of oppression of ruling class women, and I'm not in politics to liberate ruling class women, but I do understand English ruling class women have it particularly tough for historical reasons, the way that England built its empire and so on. But why are we focusing on Lily Phillips? Like, I understand the media reasons, but as an individual, there are much more worthy things to consider.
Yeah, and I could probably be, I was thinking about that when I was trying to do, not that it matters what if I have the subtitle or the title first, because that's why I wanted to make it clear, just that that I see this useful as to get some of the things we've been trying to talk about, so the material aspects and as well as how the left, the self-identified left, has been framing this. It's leaving it kind of a moralizing level, kind of who bad guys, good women, all this type of thing, which may be if we take it to the individual level, it's fine, but to me it's way more useful to take it up a scale.
No, and I do totally disagree with myself when I say that, but I just think it's worth considering. This is quite a privileged woman.
Oh, for sure. No.
Yeah. In particular, in England, have always been subject to a very harsh sexist environment and have adapted in a very sexualized way.
Oh, yeah. I'll take your word for that. It makes sense, but yeah. But the fact, of course, go ahead.
It's all about controlling ownership, isn't it? So where there's a lot of power and resources to control, women are going to have to be very rigidly controlled as well. So the British ruling class is always very like that. I always think that film, The Duchess, is a really good example. It's Keira Knightley playing the Duchess of York, who basically has every aspect of her life controlled and her children taken off her. Her husband's moving his mistresses into the house, but she's not even allowed to, and it's a lot of people on the left. I mean, I remember this as well when Kate Middleton's tits got photographed in France. Remember, there was that whole discussion of whether or not Kate Middleton's tits were public property because she gets the tax money, and why should we care about the privacy of her tits? It was kind of like, that's one of the most wealthy, privileged women in the world. She could probably have you murdered, if she wanted to, but she's still got an eating disorder. She's still not in control of what she wears or how her kids are educated, or even whether she has more children or what her body looks like or anything, So no, I'm not worried about her. And Julie Bindel has always said as well that she's not worried about, what is it she says? I'm not worried about smashing the glass ceiling or whatever. That it was, it is the women who are, facing the worst sort of effects of the system that she's interested in. But then again, it's like, a lot of this is my fault for not doing better as a campaigner, but why is there not more of a scandal over the lack of single-sex emergency accommodation for women, lack of homeless shelters for women, which is causing women to die? Dozens and dozens of women every year are dying in this horrible substandard single-sex accommodation, and trying to get these feminists to pay any attention to it or treat it like it matters. But then a hypothetical trans person finding their way into a shelter that doesn't even exist but could exist in the future is worthy of thousands of comments and likes and all the rest of it. And I'm going, do I need to find a bloody trans woman and put them in somewhere before somebody's gonna pay attention to this? Like, it's this outrage, this artificially created bloody outrage, and it's great because the right-wing people can blame the breakdown of society and, like the sex work being promoted to children and LGBT, this and that's all because of that. And the left can just, well, I don't know who's the left label, but I guess men are awful, and they could be less awful. We should be bully them into being less awful. But
Yeah, no, I didn't
yeah,
realize. I just wanted to ask you because in terms of people like Bindel and others who have what's the word to use the parlance of our times, large platforms or larger platforms. I don't did they? Because I guess when they're pitching a story for the publications that they write with, and the editors also can they're like, oh, they don't want to write about the issue that you brought up, that for a long time now you have lots of women dying in these shelters and the need for single sex spaces and to get them out of these kind of temporary hotels where there's lots of, anyway, I'll look at Laura's Twitter. She posts on it quite a bit and I'll put that in the description later. She's quite on trying to get people to pay attention to the really dire conditions of women in I guess they homeless shelters, whether the refugees or immigrants or born and raised in in Scotland. It's a really bad. It's a terrible situation. So, have you reached out to them just to make a tweet or to come to an event or something, and they're still you can't get anyone interested in this issue, even
no,
the
that's not
self-proclaimed feminists?
No, I have not. I have not been turned down by Julie Bender or anyone for anything. It's been difficult to get the same level of interest. So we have had stories that have been shared around, but it's taken a long time for it to become an issue that people will start talking about, and it has started becoming something that people are talking about. But this has been a problem for years, and it is difficult to. I think that's seen as that's a money problem, that's a poverty problem. We're talking about something different, whereas it's the same problem. So it's trying to get people to recognize that that it's related. So like the sex work thing, what's going on in these hotels can be defined as sex work. But the mentality, I suppose, would be no. When we say sex work, we mean nice, and it's kind of regulated, and you can be in a union, and you've got a really nice website, and you're
There's a
betting
difference
the guy.
between prostitution and sex work.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas what you're talking about is exploitation. It's like, well, why is it not sex work if a guy says, "All right, suck my cock and I'll give you 20 quid"? That's sex work, right? What's the difference? Because she's getting paid less because she's more desperate.
And they're not looking like
she doesn't.
Richard Gere from Pretty Woman. I can tell you that much. Anyway,
exactly. Yeah. You're worth as much as the guy says you're worth. Basically, you're worth as much as the situation. So I guess if you're wealthy, you're worth more. But that's also determined by
yeah. Okay, so this continued with Matt Walsh, although he got some pushback, even on people on there. It's been interesting that it's been kind of it's not all, high-fiving. So he continued that people are talking about this woman like she's being compelled to do this against her will. This is her choice. She's setting it up, advertising it, participating and profiting. She is her own pimp, as are so many other prostitutes these days. And someone responded to him, "Hey, Matt, rope it in. It takes the participation of the Johns to make this work. No good man would participate in this stunt. What a power move it would be. What a power move it would have been if each man walked up to her and told her they wouldn't participate. Men can take account of their role." Well, it's nice that not today's Satan, that's his handle, pushed back a bit, but I think it would also have been rude to humiliate her in that way as well, to walk up to her and say, "Yeah, no thanks." I mean, I think, but yeah.
It's just
Oh yeah, it goes on, I guess. So Kalunas responded to him. "This wasn't just consensual, casual sex or ordinary prostitution. She was asking to be seriously hurt, perhaps permanently. If someone asks you to break their bones or feed them poison, do you dismiss the one who does it with, well, that's disgusting, but he asked for it? And Matt responded, the men participating are also putting themselves at serious risks of harm. If she's a victim, why aren't they? Why are women the only ones who can ever be victims of a degrading yet consensual sexual act? And I have to say, he has a point. But she does too. So anyway. Yeah, so Samantha Smith wrote over and over again, OnlyFans isn't work, it's exploitation. OnlyFans isn't work, it's exploitation. Sex work isn't work, it's exploitation, okay? And then Ben Q asked, the lonely, pathetic men who pay for such services are the ones being exploited, right? People have it depends how you define exploited.
I knew a woman who did OnlyFans stuff, and she had a pig. Have you heard of this? This is like a guy
Sorry,
that
what?
a pig.
A pig?
A pig. Yeah, like so. This kind of guy that like paid her to sort of treat him mean.
Oh,
And
okay,
I'm
like a dominatrix thing or a.
yeah, kind of. I'm sure she was really sending him pictures, and then they would meet up whenever he had money, basically, and he would like take her out and spoil her, and she would be sort of rude to him, and that was kind of their thing.
There you go.
And I'd heard about this a few times. You know, she told me about this, and I was like, all right, okay. I mean, whatever, I guess. I'll take his money if that's what he wants to give you money for. You know, it's not the worst thing you're doing. But then one time she mentioned that she was skint and that she couldn't wait for her pig benefits to come through so that she could have money to spend. And so at that point, I was like, Jesus, like, you know, so you're midway through the month or at the end of the month and you've got no money, so now you're waiting for this guy who I just kind of started thinking this guy's got kind of some mental health stuff going on, or but also, he's in control. He's not being exploited.
Yeah.
He's making it himself.
Yeah.
And just like
Yeah,
she
I
was
mean,
making those
the
decisions.
exploitation. I mean, I think it's like because usually it's like the person that yeah. I mean, if you want to do the OnlyFans dude makes a lot of money, and his investors make a lot of money. So that's kind of like it's this weird thing. It's like that was the same argument with what was it called? Was it Uber? The idea that does the platform is it just providing a service, or is it actually kind of indirectly the employer of the people who are the Uber drivers? And it's kind of like, clearly this guy's making, at the end of the day, he makes his money off guys I'm sure there's some women who use OnlyFans too. It's not just women on there, but I'm guessing it's mainly women who pay for this quote unquote service that the women provide. So it's a rentier operation, I'm imagining. I guess that's how you'd qualify it. Just kind of, they're not adding any value to it anymore. They do provide the platform that, I don't know, processes the credit cards and Bitcoin. I don't know.
Well, Tara, I think there is a slight but kind of important qualitative difference, which does explain the Lily Phillips phenomenon. So, say, for example, Just Eat, Deliveroo, or any of these kind of gig economy platforms. No one who works in those environments makes big money. And there's no prospect of making big money. You a good day is a day where you make your tips and you go home to bed and you've had a hard day at work, but you haven't gotten rich. Whereas what's happening here is, because this is not just the gig economy, it's also media. It's performing that role that the tabloid press used to provide, where a tiny minority of people could go through a kind of glamour model, salacious, public relations thing and come out and be a wealthy individual at the end. And so it's actually more exploitative in a way. It's like, there are some gamblers who make it big.
Yeah, we talked about this before, that there are a few people and they get touted like, oh, look how much money these people make on OnlyFans, whereas most people are not making that much money. But these success cases, this is like anything else, whether it be, I mean, of course it's a different type of interaction, but I guess a kind of pyramid scheme. I don't know, that you have these few people and then you bring it in, and I can imagine that if it takes a lot of work, to produce this stuff and to make the videos or to find the scenarios that your fans want you to, I don't know, act out in. And if you're not making that much money, I don't know. But yeah, and I can see what you're saying, that people could also maybe use it as a springboard.
Yeah.
To
But
other
equally,
things.
Lily Phillips, if she hadn't had her mother as a pimp and, all this public relations around what she was doing, if she'd just been a minor player on OnlyFans and had sex with 100 people, then it would have made no impact whatsoever.
Yeah. No, I'm quite sure that it's the way that the different people can spin it that makes it titillating as well. Because like, oh look, she's pretty, she's attractive, she's very fit, she's from a good, her parents are still married, I think, and she's from a good, quote unquote, a good background, and I guess also the shtick that she sells us as that it's about sexual liberation, which is interesting. I guess to have so much, and it's weird. Like, what are you trying to liberate yourself from? It's almost, if you're disassociating, you cannot even picture most of the guys that were involved in that event. I don't know how liberating that is, but that's a different story. Mary Kate Delvey, I think she's the lady that has the listen to trans women YouTube page or something like that. And she posted 2 traumatized women, one trying to escape by pleasing men, the other trying to become one. So this must be a trans man. I thought this was interesting. This is a longer thing, but again, you can see that people are limited. And it's also, I think that's the way the media is framing it, on looking at this individual issue in terms of choice, in terms of like consent, in terms of, agency, who had agency, this type of thing. For the people who want to, again, this was in response to Bindle's article, saying that the guys who were involved were, exploiting her, and just as bad. Someone responded, there's very little difference between them. So you might have saw this too online, Laura, that people are making the comparison that there's very little difference between the men who participated in this event, this project, and the man who raped Giselle Pelicot in France. And to me, I was like, there's a difference. There's a pretty big difference. But anyway, the heretical liberal, he wrote, man, I really don't, and this is a response to Julie Bindle's article. Man, I really don't get the discourse around this at all. Do women have agency or do they not? Is it her body, her choice, or is it not? Because if you do believe women have agency as I do, and you do believe it's her body, her choice as I do, you cannot then go around and claim that she's a victim because of something she planned, paid for, and completed of her own free will. Are the men who did this equally as disgusting? There's that word again. Yes. Of course they are, but they aren't the ones having an existential crisis about on tape afterwards. It isn't their job to look after the mental health of Lily Phillips, just like it isn't Lily Phillips' job to look after the mental health of those men. We are responsible for our own mental health, and expecting the porn-addicted losers, who would subscribe to someone's OnlyFans in the first place. People are very judgy. To be the savior of women's mental health is both laughable and stupid. Of course they can't. They're almost certainly as broken as she is. And he continues, if we believe that women have agency, we must also realize that some women will do things with that agency that we don't like, or is even harmful to them. But that's the entire point of agency. You must have the freedom to make stupid choices. Giving someone agency to do the things that you approve of or that you believe are good for them isn't really agency at all. Some people like doing extreme things. It's been ever thus. So, anything stand out to you, Nick, or is it just more of the
Well, let's
level of
take it away.
analysis?
Let's take it away from sex.
Mhm.
So, I stopped using Facebook around the time that I stood for election, because I created a Twitter for that purpose. And the Twitter, after Musk took over, became much better. It was much less of powerful liberal people being smug and entertaining the oiks, oi polloi, and much more of actual discourse. And in the same period, Facebook had become this place where reels were promoted.
Mhm.
And Facebook reels, quite almost without your own volition, essentially show you snuff videos, people doing bizarre and dangerous things and dying, or being really badly injured. You know,
Mhm.
and this is a social phenomenon, where people will take on, you might call it parkour or whatever. They might climb the edge of buildings or stand on the edge of buildings and hang off by one hand. And why are they doing this?
Mhm.
They're doing this for the sort of narcissistic supply of likes on social
Mhm.
media,
That
and
little
that's
dopamine rush.
exactly, and
Mhm.
that isn't being driven by anything inherent in humans.
Mhm.
Humans are the same biologically as they have been for 100,000 years. We haven't changed, right? But sociologically we've changed. So
Mm.
it's that old thing. Like, I think it's Polynesian societies. So I'm hazy on the factoid, but there's
It's
certainly
okay.
Polynesian societies had no history of suicide until they saw it on television, and then a
Mhm.
wave of suicides came about.
Yeah.
Um,
They planted the seed, the concept, the possibility.
exactly, exactly, and
Mhm.
OnlyFans is a phenomenon in that vein. It is just a development of television. That's all it is. It's a development of television,
Mhm.
which has been monetized in a particular way, with no rules, and that that is coincided with the complete deracination of the the public realm, and of and of the things that made social democracy possible, like trade
Mhm.
unions, churches, community in a
Mhm.
broad general sense, right? And all of that has met in the middle with a rentier economy.
Mhm.
In the same way that, I pay the Amazon tax. I like being able to get things delivered. It's no
Mhm.
longer possible with Royal Mail to guarantee things being delivered. It used to be. We had a public service. It used to be good. Now it's
Mhm.
terrible. And so, I pay 7 odd quid a month to get things reliably delivered.
Mhm.
And that's really the same. Like Lily Phillips she's just an expression of what I said before. Opportunities make a thief. If you create the circumstances where someone
Mhm.
can use a media to
Mhm.
advance themselves, someone will do it. Some extreme person will always do it.
Mhm.
The same as some extreme person will hang off a building in order to
Mhm.
get likes. So, it-
Yeah, and I think that when things like this happen and everyone's opining and this is disgusting, that's disgusting, they're both disgusting, this and that and the other. It's like, okay, but we're all part of this society, and obviously a lot, especially driving the algorithm and the likes and the this, and whether whether you're watching something because you hate it or you love it, you're participating in that. And
Mhm.
this idea that somehow it's just oh, each their own, we're all just these little Robinson Crusoe's islands and whatnot, as if. And I think that, of course, at one level, yeah, we're individuals. If you're an adult, okay, fine, but it's not like these things don't aggregate up to have a larger impact or a
Mhm.
social impact. that do affect people. It's like, it's not just the rentiers or the people who, like we talked about before, the people putting off making forming families or getting together or losing the capacity, these people who are 25 or late 30s still virgins or only have OnlyFans content. It's like, okay, but that also affects not just them. So if you don't care about them, as it aggregates up, this becomes larger material social problems.
Yeah.
It's easy to be like, oh well, you do me, and as long as you're not, scraping my nose, then it's all fine. But I don't know. I'm not to use an anecdote. Oh well, this is a tangent. I thought about saying this a while back, and I didn't. I have a son my son's 18, and when he was 15, and he's lucky, he's tall, he's good looking, he'll chat anybody up. Not that you have to be tall and good looking, but it helps. Or anyway, you know what I mean. But he was showing me what girls his age and a bit older were sending him, and just basically all I can say is like offering themselves up, like no strings attached. And he's showing me this, and first of all, I'm like, well, I'm glad he's showing me this, but so then I had that talk with him, like, it's your body too. And yeah, girls and boys are different and all that. But so yeah, consent and protection and all that. But I just want you to, and I thought, what can I do? If he's getting offered this buffet of I says that you're also going to have, just to try to be like, it also could have an effect on you. Your body's also important, this and whatever. And he's like, oh, I know, mom. And I hope he did. But I was just really shocked because I had heard about this before. But when he starts showing me this, I'm thinking, I was expecting to have to, I was just really shocked by that. So it trickles down to our kids as well.
But, teenagers will be teenagers. I remember being 12, 13, 14, and young lasses would come up to me and ask me to feel their breasts and tell me that, that they would sleep with me, and that, they'd be a lot more explicit than that. And it was a form of bullying. It was just people would do that. It's just, the thing that's changed now is not our biology. It's just the nature of the media and the way it's consumed, and the way in which we've become more atomized.
Yeah. But I was just, I thought great. And then it continued on, then he started to be like, oh, this friends with benefits thing. This first year of university was last year. Last year. Or college, sorry. And then I had to be, again, he was 18. It's like, okay. And I said, look, here's what happens. Friends with benefits never work. It only works out for one. And soon you'll not be friends. So either because one person, and probably her, are going to develop feelings. And so either this develops into something real, or it's going to ruin the friendship. But he was like, oh, no, she's fine with it. And I'm just like, oh my God, what can you do but say, like,
well,
anyhow, but proudly just announcing this. I'm thinking, if I was 18 and had a friend with benefits, I would never have told my
your mother, yeah. Exactly.
Like, don't you have a friend? But no, then I thought, okay, maybe it's a good thing. Laura's back. Anyway, so let's see. To get through a few more of these before we wrap up. Let's see. So this is okay. So this is from you might know, you're probably familiar with her, Laura, the famous artist Bertie Rose. She's big on the turf circuit. There's a lot of art, turfy art, or AI. And so she posted, and the feminists came for her, or the consensus feminists came for her. I don't feel sorry for Lily Phillips, the woman who slept with 100 men in one day, bragged that she wants to do barely legals and is planning to sleep with 1,000 men in one day. I think she's disgusting and proud of it. People really want to know that they want it to be known that everyone's disgusting. I also think that men who participate in their videos are disgusting. Well, since we never see their faces and they aren't bragging online, I don't know how proud they are. Every person, from Lily to the cameraman to the participants, ought to be ashamed. That's the problem, though, isn't it? They most likely aren't ashamed. Shame on our current culture. Shame that our current culture isn't something I think shame in our current culture. Thank you. Isn't something that's allocated to people who do things like post videos of themselves giving head to 5 guys at once. Shame is allocated in our culture to people who have the wrong opinions. For example, I bet there will be more outrage aimed at anyone who dares to criticize Lily than there is at her choice to do this to herself and to exploit it for attention, fame, and money. People who criticize this empowered sex worker, in quotes, will be made to feel ashamed so that Lily and her accomplices can be spared any shame in this. What a strange society.
GCs are the new Lib fans.
Yeah.
They really are. This is them, all of them at once. They're distancing themselves from feminism because they've got all this clout among the Matt Walshes and the all these right wing pundits now, and they've gotten used to being interviewed on GB News and palling up with these people, and they've gone, oh well, let's just get rid of all that nonsense feminism because that's holding us back. That's what's tying us to these awful Marxist feminists and what are they called? Yeah, just rad femmes and Hamas lovers, etc. Like, so it's, I mean,
Hamas supporters.
What's her face said, artist Birdie Rose's sympathy and compassion only ever seems to extend to her. Woe is me, I got cancelled. It's so hard. Fuck the rest of you. Like.
Well, and also, I mean, this, of course, I can also discuss, but I was just like, I'm like, somebody has got to make the broader argument here. So what is it? It's like, oh, they're disgusting, you're disgusting, everybody's disgusting. It's like, okay, let's have some, we're all cracked vessels, as Cornel West would say.
We need a strong leader to come and sort immorality out.
Laura, they don't even believe that. They are two. It's two cheeks of the same arse of liberalism. One says anything goes as long as you agree completely with me, or I'll cancel you. The other says, this is the way you comport yourself, but do not criticize the economic system. Right, so they're just two branches of liberalism, and you see that, the U.S. state is just two branches of liberalism competing with each other. Tories duke it out for which particular Tory should win. Right?
But a lot of these women are cozying up to certain narratives, very deliberately to extend their own kind of influence. So the people we're looking at here on Twitter.
People will always seek out self-interest, and but
but is it politically motivated?
Well, the phrase Alexander used early on, degenerate, and he talked about degenerate, degenerate. Keep me right tired. It was a degenerate capitalism, degenerate late-stage capitalism.
Yeah.
Right, but the very concept of having a thing that is degenerate requires society. It requires a consensus. So, for example, we still have a consensus that paedophilia is degenerate.
At the moment.
Well, exactly. And so, for example, Scotland jailed a man today on 4 grounds of terrorism because he was a neo-Nazi who had a range of weapons. So we've agreed societally that he's a degenerate. Right? But the more we push boundaries, the less we have in common, the less we can say, this is wrong and that's right.
No, and I agree, and I think it's part of this lack of all this there's just more and more evidence of that. Okay, so the whether it be alternative facts or fake news, and of course there's a lot of fake news. This lack of a shared conceptual space or social space. I agree with that. And what Jamie Lynn has said is, I do agree that shame needs to come back. I agree. Now, shame in and of itself is neither good nor bad. I mean, and I think that a lot of things I think that some people have this now, like this should be illegal. Like people were saying what these guys did should be illegal and it should be illegal, should be legal. I'm like, okay, maybe, you know, but it's also that I think like things like shame and mockery and whatnot. That's why I rail against the idea that I learned this. I learned this through my turf time, because you get told to be nice so much, you're bad because you're not nice, and you should be affirmed, and this and that, and civility politics, and you're like, no, some things like, you know, it's like shame and mockery and that type of thing. It depends. It depends on the context, and I agree. But like, I agree very much with you that it's going to have a very liquidated appeal if we don't have some sort of you know, certain things that are agreed upon.
Yeah.
You know, such as the forever want to call it that the ramifications or the negative consequences of the so-called sexual revolution within this capitalist context have been quite a lot, even though we don't see them necessarily say them as such. But this, you know, reducing of sex to this transactional mechanical, just kind of, you know, basically turning men into dildos and women into sex toys or whatever, or sex dolls, whatever the thing is. But somehow that's, well, you know, if they're doing it and they're fine with it, and someone's making money, and the plastic is, you know, conscientiously sourced, then, you know, whatever. It's like, it's crazy, but I just think it's just this, I don't know, and yeah. So let's see. So let's see.
I'm really gonna have to head out, guys, because I need to go to the shops before they shut. Sorry.
Okay, well, let's just wrap up. Can we just do this one thing and then we'll stop?
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay. Went on a good note. Maybe not a good note. So someone wrote back to famous artist Bertie Rose. 70% of women who end up in sex work have childhood abuse in their history. Given what we know about our family, I'd say there's a serious background issue there. People are assuming that. She deserves compassion. No healthy person chooses that life. She's clearly troubled. And famous artie Bertie Rose writes back, it's not my duty to give her compassion, though. I don't feel compassion. I feel disgust. Well, it's solved then.
It's the way of the future. I'll just be disgusted with each other forever.
Yeah. And who's more disgusting, her or her mom, or and I know Genevieve Gluck really focuses on the what would we call it? The everything is caused by porn, but at least she did respond. If I can find the thing, and then I'll let you go. Where is it? Oh, why is this happening to me? Sorry, people. Here. Genevieve Gluck, owner of OnlyFans, Leonid Radvinsky, raked in more than $1 billion in 3 years, peddling porn culture to young women. Women are getting the message loud and clear that their only value lies in whether men want to fuck them. Porn culture benefits men at women's expense. Yeah, you're not going to get any sympathy for men from Genevieve Gluck, which is, you know, it's all right. But truth be told, like, we know why he's happy. Cha-ching. All right, Laura has to go. Thank you, Laura. Comrade, keep hope alive. And everybody go check out her Twitter page or Twitter handle. I'll put in the description, because she does a lot of work in Scotland, focusing on housing in particular. Also trying to push the government to provide single-sex shelters for women instead of having them in hotels that are mostly men, and you can imagine it's not very nice. Anyway, thank you, Laura.
Thank you. See you again soon.
Thanks.
Cheers,
So let's wrap up. I'll give you anything you want to say about any of this. So the sexual revolution, the capitalism, the alienation, the media, the technological age that we're in, making all of this crazier.
Essentially, I started with Mary Whitehouse, and I talked about the liberalisation of media and the way in which liberalisation has essentially driven us to a position where the government cannot regulate
and any individual can promote any kind of sexual salaciousness. But let's go in an entire tangent.
Do it.
We are right now in almost an undeclared world war.
Mm.
There are a huge number of proxy conflicts, coups, and a war rivaling the Korean War taking place in Europe. And Germany, which liberalized its brothels, basically created, government-sanctioned brothels, super brothels.
Mhm.
The vast majority of prostituted women, trafficked women who work in these brothels come from Ukraine.
Mm.
And, the mayor of Kiev, Vitaly Klitschko, is the largest brothel keeper in Europe. And that's where the Western world is pushing. So we're, in a way, Lily Phillips echoes the bleeding edge of capitalist liberalism in what it's attempting to do.
Yeah. All right. On that note, thank you very much, Nick, for joining and going through helping going through this with us and offering your insights. I really much appreciate it. And I look forward to hearing them again when I edit this video. Everybody, it was no. I mean, I know what I think, or I know. Go ahead. Sorry.
We went from a world when I was a 3-year-old child where you would input a disc into a computer that you purchased in a shop that was regulated, to a world where you can download anything for almost nothing with no cost and no regulation. And as a result, we've created a Wild West.
Yeah, and who knows what the ramifications are going to be. We'll see. And it's hard to know because I remember, because I get it's, and especially because I have kids as well. So I'm, my son, again, God bless him, he tells me that he doesn't watch the porn. I'm like, okay, I mean, all I say is I try to tell him, I still have control over my girls' devices and whatnot. So that's easier to, not that you can be, they could probably hack it, but I don't think they're into that. But I tell him, I'm like, look, I go, you're not going to want to hear this, but if I were you, it's like maybe a magazine or something, whatever. I mean, I don't want to judge but just to know that you can't unsee things. And once you get onto something, then it kind of progresses. He's like, no, I watched it a little bit, but I'm not interested in that. And I don't. So he says that he seems to have an awareness of what I'm trying to say about, best to not get too much into that. But of course, he has all the ladies after him and has, one girlfriend after the other. But that's another story. Hopefully he has one now that's lasted 4 months. So hope springs eternal. But yeah, it's just, I mean, anyway, sorry, I'm rambling. But what I want to say is because in terms of we don't know the long-term consequences of this, I mean, we can speculate. We have minds. We could be like, not that we have to have data to know that certain things are not ideal or should be frowned upon. But do you remember back in the day when there was a whole thing about the video games?
Yes.
And I remember because we had we had a lot more of the gun violence in the States. And so there was a time when people wanted to blame, before they blamed mental health, it was the video games. That's why there's all this stuff.
I remember in the mid-noughties, an episode of Games Master, which had to go out, I think it was quite late. It was like a BBC program. And, the presenter of The Sky at Night, Patrick Stewart, moonlighted as the Games Master. But they were reviewing the Mega Drive 2 or I can't remember the Mega Drive Ultra. But basically, you put DVDs in instead of these plasticky blocks. And it was pornographic games. And they were basically the equivalent of Granny's Garden. Where you get a choice. Do you take the left road, or do you take the gingerbread? And there was a moral panic about it.
Yeah. Well, the reason why I brought it up is because I remember, because at one level it makes sense. Like, okay, well, if you're playing these games and you're kind of, and the part of the good is to kill as many people as possible or whatever. I thought, okay, but then it turned out later that there didn't seem to be any solid evidence that I was connecting to it. And so now I'm thinking, when I hear all this stuff about, well, porn's doing this, porn's doing that, porn's doing this, porn's doing that, and I'm thinking, okay, it makes sense to me that the porn thing is obviously an issue. The exploitation part, the part, how it affects men, or our sexual development, and how we regard sex and ourselves and all this stuff. But I'm always that keeps on playing back in my mind again, that, well, and I think, and the reason why I bring this up is because I think there's this idea that, and again, we're busy and it's crazy and it's hard, but we want the easy way out. And if there could be like this empirical, neurological, whatever proof, some Fauci guy gets up and says, look, this is your brain on porn. This is bad, that somehow we won't have to deal with the underlying factors that created this problem.
No, it's liberal nonsense. I mean, I watched recently the Jimmy Savile documentary, and they were talking about Jimmy Savile in the 1960s and how he had colonized a hospital, and as a charity fundraiser, the hospital board, who knew that he was a paedophile and knew that he was raping people in their hospital, were prepared to tolerate this as long as he got them the millions in investment that he did procure. And the dominant ideas in society will always be the ideas of the ruling elites, and the technology itself doesn't change anything. It just enables things, but the main thing is that we've had a total collapse in society. Jimmy Savile benefited from a culture of deference, and was able to exploit that. And the way in which OnlyFans, getting their $1.3 billion of revenue, they're benefiting from a different idea where we have a laissez-faire. You can do anything you want with media.
Yeah. And fake now too. The AI and the deep fakes and all that stuff. I was just like,
that is just the new front.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it's kind of and we know we should, or it's hard we have to remind ourselves that a lot of times technology is neutral. It depends on the situation and the context and the social relations that it's being, utilized in. Anyway, Nick, thank you so much. Nick is again, he's a longtime organizer in Scotland around housing and other things, and he's a member of the Alba Party, and he ran last election for Glasgow North, and he's still politically active, and so he's a good follow. I'll add his Twitter handle to the video description on YouTube and Rumble, but probably tomorrow because it's getting a bit late. Everybody who tuned in, thank you very much. I appreciate the comments. We'll probably have a follow-up on this topic, maybe not in terms of Lily Phillips in particular, but just I think it's really important because we're so inclined on both the left bourgeois and the right bourgeois to see these things in a very kind of moralistic, individual scale level. And so to the best of our ability that we can, try to bring in these to scale it up a bit and to broaden out a bit, to look at to bring more of the forces and relations in, I think is important. And thank God I know people like you and Laura and Alexander and some others. So I can bring them on and learn as well.
Good to have a crack, everyone.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Nick. See you next time. Bye. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. All right. I'm going to try hard not to ramble on. I realize I do that at the end when I've been editing the videos now to make shorter segments. So I'm not going to ramble on. I'm just going to say thank you for tuning in. Please do like and subscribe on, what are we on? YouTube, Rumble, X. Also have a Substack that I'm trying to write more, fleshing things out more that come up in the podcasts. And And we'll see you next time. Thank you very much. Have a good night, and Merry Christmas, Happy Christmas, Feliz Navidad, Hanukkah. I don't know if there's an Eid going on now, but all that good stuff. Winter solstice for the pagans. Anyway, see you next time, people. Thank you very much for tuning in. Bye.